Hi, I'm Kat, and this storytime video is about my experience with anesthesia awareness. That's when the anesthesia doesn't work and you're conscious during surgery. Not so good. It's a genetic problem. My dad has it, my aunt has it, my grandmother and great uncle had it. I didn't know about this till after the fact. Probably would have been good to know in advance. And it was surprising because I did have a tonsillectomy in 2009, which, now that we know that I had a tumor at that point, was actually really dangerous, and I'm lucky I didn't die. So that's very surprising. Of course, that's a very quick surgery. It's probably just like a few minutes after they get you under, and it's probably a different type of anesthesia, but I don't really know all the ins and outs of that. So I was diagnosed with a Pheochromocytoma in 2011. I had been sick for many years and seen many doctors, and I'll be posting other storytime videos about that whole experience eventually. If they're already posted, they'll be linked down below, but for now I haven't made them. With my anesthesia awareness, it wasn't like I was awake during the surgery. Some people have reactions to the anesthesia where they completely wake up and they're fully mobile and it's as if the anesthesia just doesn't work on them. That's not what happened to me. I was completely paralyzed, but I could hear and smell and taste everything. So from the beginning of my surgery journey, the anesthesiologist, who is a fantastic physician, he's amazing, he is probably the most capable anesthesiologist I could have had access to. He's a professor of anesthesiology at this hospital. He was amazing, and this was in no way his fault. It's just a genetic problem, and if they're not monitoring your brain waves with actually a fairly new technology, a type of live EEG, they really have no way to know that you are conscious for this experience. So he was really, the one in control, and that's the way it always is with these types of tumors. The pheochromocytoma is on the medulla of the adrenal gland, and your adrenal glands are on top of your kidneys. And anytime you're operating on or around the kidneys, it's a very vascular area, and it's very risky surgery. I knew going in that it was a very risky surgery, and I knew that part of the risk of that is because these tumors tend to react to anesthesia. So when exposed to anesthesia, something can happen where the tumor will start surging, which is, the main symptom of a pheochromocytoma. It's the rush of adrenaline and the fight or flight response. If that happens while you're on the operating table and you're cut open, you can bleed to death very quickly. So I knew ahead of time that I was going to have a couple of monitors installed. I knew that I was going to have the Swan-Ganz monitor, where they go into your neck and they run it down into your heart and they monitor your blood pressure from there. They also put one into my arm, fairly high up actually. So I had another arterial monitor in this arm, and that was just to give the surgical team as much information as quickly as possible, so if things did go really wrong, they could just do a big ol' slice of me, get the tumor out, and try and stabilize me as quickly as possible. The odds are better now. I don't want to scare anyone who has this type of tumor because the odds are much better now. The technology has grown by leaps and bounds, and because they've been able to find more of these tumors, they've been able to operate on more of them, and surgical teams are better equipped to handle the situation. But when I had it done, they let me know that the odds were not fantastic. They were pretty bad actually. Pretty bad odds of survival. So I knew that there was a chance I could die, and there was a chance that I could wake up with a really huge scar because things went wrong and they had to get the tumor out quickly. Luckily, none of those things happened. So in pre-op, my dad, my boyfriend, who is now my husband, and my sister were there, and we did our good luck, you'll do great kind of thing, and the anesthesia was started then. And I didn't expect to remember anything in the OR after that point, but I remember from this point, they wheeled me down the hall, and I see 11s everywhere, and I've always taken it as a good sign, which is actually really funny because this tumor, I have a genetic mutation on the 11th chromosome. Interesting. Anyway, so they wheeled me back into the hallway down to the OR, and there are these boards that they have numbers of all the different operating rooms, and 11 was lit up. And I was like really excited. I'm like, oh, is 11 my operating room? And they're like, no, you're number 9. Okay, whatever. So they wheeled me into 9, and it was different from anything I'd ever seen. The table was like this really cold, like refrigerated metal, and they pulled up my gurney next to it, and they had me lift myself onto the operating table and kind of settle in, but it was freezing cold. Like, I felt like I was being refrigerated. So they probably have me on one of those neuro tables where they can lower your body temperature, and it makes it safer for certain types of surgeries. The anesthesiologist assistant came and he gave me another injection of something else, and he had me count backwards, and it kind of worked. I got really loopy after this point. Really loopy. I remember trying, I'm awful. I distinctly remember trying to grab somebody's butt, some scrubs, just a butt walking past me, and I like lunged for it. And after that, they strapped me down with Velcro. So I remember there being some kind of a board that came out of the right side of the table. After I tried to grab somebody's butt, they like Velcroed my whole body down, and then they put my arm out on this board thing and Velcroed it down to that. And then I couldn't move. And they turned on the radio, which is really weird. And at this point, they started working on my arterial catheters. So they had to put the one into my neck and into my arm. And I remember them swabbing me. So they marked me with a pen, like somebody was feeling me. They marked me with some kind of a marker, and then they swabbed me with something cold and wet, and then they covered me with this thing that was kind of like a big blue paper towel, but they only covered the upper half of my body at this point. They turned on the radio, and I didn't even know going into this that in the OR there's a radio on and people are just like jamming out to music. So they were listening to Top 40 radio, and all of a sudden Kesha came on. In my mind, I was saying, please change the station, because if I die, I don't want Kesha to be the last artist I heard. I probably honestly just like made some kind of a grunting noise, and somebody looked underneath the sheet at me and they said, oh, she really doesn't like that, or somebody doesn't like that. And so they covered me up again and they changed the station, which is really funny. And then I heard the anesthesiologist's voice and he said, okay, plug her. And I don't know if that means like give me more drugs or what happened, but at that point, I don't remember seeing anything again after that point. And they probably taped my eyes shut at that point, because in most surgeries, they'll tape your eyes shut, you know, if you wake up so you can't see anything, because that's gonna make it better. From that point, I didn't see anything else. But from that point forward, I was completely paralyzed. So I would think I was talking, but no one was hearing me, or I would struggle to scream and nothing would come out. And I guess that next dose of anesthesia is what paralyzed me. They started cutting into my arm, and the thing about anesthesia is not that it numbs your whole body. It doesn't numb anything. It just knocks you out. And I guess we're counting on people not remembering what happened to them because they're so heavily drugged. So they started cutting into my right arm, and that was up to that point the most excruciating thing I had ever felt. And then they started putting, and it felt like a massive tube. It felt like someone was taking a piece of PVC pipe and shoving it into my arm, but in reality, the cannula was probably, you know, like pretty small, like itty bitty. But it was going into my artery and a ways up into the artery as well. It couldn't have been more than a few minutes, but it felt like it was an hour of them sawing into my arm and then shoving this thing into my artery. They had holes cut, it felt like they had holes cut in the paper towel thing, and they would just be doing their business through that. So I felt like they moved that sheet and then put the opening right here. But they started cutting into my neck, and then they put that catheter into my neck, and oh my gosh, it was like, the sensation is what I imagine it would be like to be injected with poison. It was so painful, and I could feel the catheter moving like down through my arteries. It was not a good sensation. So that monitor, the catheter actually went all the way into my heart and looped around, I guess. And as it entered my heart, while it was moving in there, the heart doesn't really quite beat. It would just feel like it was shaking, it was vibrating. Anytime that they were messing with that arterial catheter and manipulating the cannula, it felt like my heart wasn't beating, it was just shaking, and that's a horrible sensation. Because at least if you're nervous, you can feel your heart thumping, but I didn't even have that. It was really, really creepy. That felt like it took another hour, which it definitely didn't. And then it felt like I was just waiting there forever, and these two things just kept like throbbing in pain. It was so painful. And I felt like people kept moving things, and every time they moved it, like it would just hurt more. And then they started the surgery. So my surgery was done laparoscopically. Thank God, they didn't have to cut me open and do a big incision. The surgery required 4 small incisions on my abdomen, on the right side of my abdomen. And your kidney is like fairly far back behind all your organs, so they had to put scoops in to move my stomach and my intestines and my liver out of the way. Oh boy, that's really weird. So I felt them cutting into my abdomen, and that was probably the most painful part out of all of this, is the incisions into my abdomen and when they put the tools in. So I guess there were 2 of the holes were for the tools that do like the cutting and dicing or whatever, and then 2 other holes I think were for cameras, because they have to be able to see into you and operate the tools. When they were cutting into me, initially I felt like they were using a scalpel, and then I started to feel burning, and then I started to smell burning, and it was my flesh. And when I started smelling it, a couple seconds later I started tasting it. It's kind of like a mix between like if you've ever smelled burning hair and barbecue, but without the sauce. So it's like a combination of those 2 scents, except you can taste it. I haven't really asked anyone who's been in an OR if the smell is really that strong, but it was overwhelming for me. There were a couple times I felt like I was gonna puke, like I felt my stomach kind of like clench up like I was gonna throw up, but luckily I didn't. I was just thinking to myself, don't throw up, don't throw up, don't throw up, because you'll die. Like my whole goal through this whole thing was just, don't die. The burning flesh was pretty gnarly, and then once they got inside my body and the tools were situated, of course, like when they touched the tools and when things moved, the incisions hurt, but you kind of reach a point where you're in so much pain that that part starts to go numb for a little while. So every once in a while it would snap back to me and I would feel it just as strong, but it was kind of like it would hurt really bad and then it would taper out, and then it would hurt really bad again and then it would taper out. It felt like eternity, and it was about a 4-hour surgery, or a 4.5-hour surgery. But then once they were inside my body, I don't know if there just aren't as many nerve endings in your internal organs or what. I haven't really studied the nervous system in depth like that. So once they were inside, it was like I could feel from the massive amounts of pressure that they were doing things. Like I could feel when they moved my liver out of the way, and I could feel when they moved my stomach out of the way, and so I could feel when they were kind of like digging through my organs to find my kidney. Just a pretty gross way to think about it. What I was feeling in my body, like I could feel my pancreas and my intestines and my bowel and my stomach, and I just felt like I was this sack of flesh filled with guts and blood, and yeah, it's pretty gross. It's really gross. So they moved those things out of the way, and then I could definitely feel when they got to my kidney, and it was like an electric shock when they first touched it. And then it kind of felt like something like clamped down on that sucker and started like burning stuff off of it. It was bad. It felt like there was a vice on my kidney or something like that. I don't know. I don't really know exactly how they do it. I could feel every time that there was a cut made, because it was, not only could I smell it, but I could taste it, and I could feel that like a sharp electric burning sensation, if that makes any sense whatsoever. It was kind of, I mean, like a nerve pain, like a sharp tingling nerve pain, but it also felt like burning on my kidney. And I had had so much kidney pain for so many years that I can just like really feel my kidneys. I think I'm very attuned to them. They cut off the tumor and it took a really long time. There would be like these bursts of pain and then it would feel like nothing was happening for a really long time. Like they were just staring at it or something. And then there were quite a few times when all the machines would start beeping and I would get, like I felt cold, freezing cold the whole time. But there were, I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 times, all the machines started beeping and I would feel freezing cold. And then I would feel like my whole body was shivering. And then they would inject me with stuff and I would feel like burning in my veins. Oh, that's another thing. Like every time they inject you with something, it burns. Like it really, really hurts. It's very uncomfortable, especially these drugs, whatever it was they were giving me when this was happening, these events. I'm not sure. I don't really want to think too much into like what was happening at that point, but 2 or 3 times I felt very cold and I could feel myself like I wanted to leave my body. And I very much felt like there was a moment when I had a choice to leave or to stay. And I was very, very aware that sorry, most of this doesn't bother me anymore, but this part bothers me. I could feel like I did not want to be in that body anymore, and I could feel myself kind of float up out of it. And it's something that I feel like I've always done to some extent because I was in so much pain for so long that I would kind of, and I don't know if this makes sense to everyone, it's like I would hang out just outside of my body. Like somewhere around here, I would just detach and switch that part of me off and just not feel anything. And I do remember very specifically during one of these events when all the machines started beeping and they started doing things to me and they started injecting me with extra stuff, I was pushing myself outside of my body and I knew that I had a choice. And that was very powerful because going into it, I was pretty sure I was gonna die. And I had felt like, well, I can be scared or I can make peace with it. And for the most part, I made peace with it, even though I'm not ready. I wasn't ready then, I'm not ready now. And I felt like I just made peace with it. And I just needed to put on a brave face for everyone else and try my hardest. But there's something very powerful about this choice that I was faced with, and I could feel like I could stay out of my body and I could keep going and go on to whatever's next, or I could stay. And I knew I was being told that if I stayed, it would be very difficult. It would be very painful, and it wouldn't be an easy recovery. There would be a lot of things that I would have to deal with, and I made a conscious decision to stay in my body, to get back in my body and ride it out. And I did that, and it was like immediately I was kind of like, did I make the right choice? Because I was in so much pain and this experience was so traumatic, and something I would not wish on anyone. I guess I was talking to God and God told me either way is okay, you know? I didn't feel like choosing to leave was a sad thing in that moment. It just felt like an option. Like I had 2 options, and that honestly felt like very much the easy option. But it's a huge unknown, and I didn't know what was gonna come after that. I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel scared. You would think that when faced with the choice to live or die, it would be very dramatic, and you would feel like nervous about it. But I think it was it was a moment beyond any kind of physical experience I'd had, and so fear didn't really factor in for me. And anxiety didn't factor in because those are such physical. All right, so now that I've cried, so then they finished up and I could feel, you know, I could feel them closing everything up. Oh, the stitches were pretty gnarly too. When they pulled the tumor out, it was just like, it was like pulling a watermelon through a hose. It was like a tight fit. It was gross. It was really gross. And like, it's bad enough being cut open, but when they're dragging something like too big for the incision through it, it kind of like stretches your flesh and it's very uncomfortable. So they pulled that out. They kind of, you know, were checking my monitors a lot, making sure everything was okay, and then they stitched me up. They stitched me up and then they put, oh, and that burned too. That like really stung. They did the traditional stitches internally, like the dissolvable stitches, and then they glued my incisions shut. Yeah, it's just strange. And it was strange listening to the conversations. It was just very matter of fact. It was weird. And you hear the instruments clanging together and people shuffling around, and it was interesting. But I felt very well cared for the entire time. I remember the anesthesiologist talking to his assistant, explaining that he wanted me to be asleep for like a good amount of time. Or he wanted me to be out for a good amount of time after the surgery. And he's like, okay, you can go ahead and push that. And I don't remember anything after that until I woke up. And the next thing I remember is waking up and saying, thank you, God, I'm alive. It didn't seem like it was gonna happen. And I was very, very happy when I woke up. I was so happy when I woke up. And my dad and my sister and my boyfriend were there, and it was wonderful. And right away I remembered a little bit of it, and I told myself, that's crazy. You don't remember your surgery. And so I didn't tell anyone about it for a while, and then every day a little bit more would come back to me, and I was worried that it was something I was imagining, and that it was just like some kind of weird freaky story that my brain had made up. And pretty soon it got to the point where I could remember everything. And I know specifically for me, I block out trauma. I've had a couple of other really traumatic things happen to me that I completely blocked out and didn't remember for years. And then some kind of event would trigger it, and I would suddenly have these memories back, and they would come back in bits and pieces. And this was exactly like that. And there are some parts that are a little bit fuzzy still, and some parts that are just as clear as any other memory that you really focus on remembering. And I think the more that I think about it and relive it, the more stuff comes back to me, just like little random details. It wasn't until I talked to my dad about it that he told me that he has the same anesthesia problem, and he kind of validated everything for me, because I didn't even know that was something that could happen. I thought it was like this freak thing and that people would wake up from surgery, but I thought it was always like they wake up and they'd like sit up and be fully animated, not this horrible thing where you feel everything but you're paralyzed. I didn't think that could happen. I remember as much now as I'm ever gonna remember, and I feel a lot better about it. Spent a lot of time in therapy on this, guys. A year and a half in trauma therapy to help me get through this experience, but I feel like people can heal from anything, and I really have that hope for myself that someday, you know, the PTSD thing won't be a factor in my life anymore, and I won't have the night terrors that are triggered from it. I just felt happy when I woke up, and even as painful as my recovery was and as slow as it was, I immediately felt like a different person in a good way. And There were so many things that had plagued me for so many years because of that tumor that were just gone overnight, and that's amazing. And most people aren't sick for 16 years and then get an answer like this and just have surgery and don't have to be on medication after. A lot of people are not as lucky as I am and as blessed as I am. And so even though I had this experience, overall, I am really, really blessed to be where I am and to have had the surgical team that I did, because they are the best of the best, and I am so eternally grateful to them. It doesn't hurt to talk about it like it used to. I don't shake and cry through the whole thing when I try and talk about it now. It took me like 6 months to even really believe that that happened. And then probably like a year and a half to 2 years to be able to talk to anyone in depth about it. And now I'm at a place where I can share my story, and I woke up and I'm alive, and you can't really be much more blessed than that.